Greetings, travelers, and welcome to the year, I've done this gag a few times now, 2010.
Yes! Oh my god!
When the first difficult video game ever made in human history came out. Dark Souls? Okay, believe it or not, Dark Souls is not the first difficult video game ever made. It's actually Demon Souls. No, we have to go a little further back than that. The first video game ever made is usually credited to Tennis for Two, not to be confused with its much more successful and handsome younger sibling, Pong. That's because this was more of a demonstration of what could be done with some old radar equipment. It's actually really cool, and really irrelevant to this video. Another fun fact, things existed before video games. Pinball, Pachinko, and other games existed. I want you to picture an arcade or more like a county fair with the other various attractions, and remember that these games are kind of fucked up. That's because the goal isn't really to win, at least not for the game designers. It's to make the participant feel close enough to winning to keep spending more money on more attempts. Don't worry, it is all fun and games. Just don't start withdrawing all your savings and going into debt because you're this close to getting the next big win. Otherwise, you might have the makings of a type of gambling addict. If we take a video game lens, we can think of the amount of balls in pinball as a life system, where the player loses once they run out. Using the same lens, the dollars in your bank account are also a life system. A lot of early video games were designed around a similar paradigm, but these are not the only type of games that existed. Still, old arcade games are rather infamous for how incredibly easy they are to lose, only to be met with a screen that says, 25 cents is all it takes. Although, 25 cents a pop is sounding almost reasonable these days. To say these games had an incentive to be difficult is to put it mildly. Even then, it was a balancing act. Make a game too hard and most people will get too frustrated to put more money into the machine. Once home consoles became more common and more games were being made for them, the life system I originally proposed to be an avenue to make money still remained intact. In some games. Perhaps even most games. Hello? Game designers? Why are they still here? It's because it can still make a compelling gameplay loop. Emphasis on the can. Difficulty in general as a motivator is incredibly common in game design. In fact, it can be so simple and so stupid that it's basically the entire premise for the creation of Flappy Bird, proving how little it takes to make something sensational. Dark Souls is not the first difficult action RPG ever made. If you watched the beginning of one of my embarrassingly long videos, you would know that the most popular PC game in Japan in the 1980s was Xanadu, a game so infamous that the developers, Nihon Falcom, handed out cards to anyone who proved they beat it. The 8th person in the world recognized to beat Xanadu was a guy named Masahiro Sakurai, who is an underground game director for indie series such as Super Smash Bros. And Kirby. You might notice something about the types of games this guy is known for, but what's apparent when watching Sakurai or listening to him talk about video games? This guy is a fucking gamer. Not only did he beat this super fucked up action RPG in the 80s, he was also a seasoned Fatal Fury player. That's only part of the reason for Terry's inclusion in Smash Bros., and 100% of the reason why the game had no motion inputs until it did. Something that he has been very vocal about is seeing how brutally difficult games were and realizing that maybe not every game should be made this way. He saw newcomers getting crushed in King of Fighters and thought they could make a fighting game where beginners didn't spend the whole time getting pub stomped. Speaking of which, did you know that a random user on a Japanese forum explained Wavedashing long before anyone else did, and that user turned out to be Sakurai again? I never pass up an opportunity to make an Awesome Sauce reference. While Melee is known for something completely different these days, I put the most hours into it as a kid playing with all items on in a 4-player free-for-all, something that the majority of players experienced. Probably. Smash Bros. Can be a highly competitive game series, but it is much more approachable because of how easy it is to understand. Kirby can be looked at in a similar way. Not everyone wants friction in their games, and I don't know what the developers of Soma did to deserve the heat. Sakurai realized they could appeal to different people. Note, I am not claiming that Sakurai is the man who spearheaded the casual game revolution. Nihon Falcom themselves would go on to create an action RPG series that was less difficulty-focused, which is known as Ys, though I wouldn't exactly say those games are super easy. What becomes a challenge when talking about challenge is that easier games are not inherently better. Same goes for difficult ones. I'd say they offer fundamentally different experiences. This video has been brewing in the back of my mind for a while. I can point to recent video game that came out, but it's only one in the string of multiple high-profile releases that are centered around challenge and don't offer an easy mode in the menu. Put a pin in that for later. What I am about to discuss are not super common opinions, and usually the people advocating for this don't deny that, but nonetheless, the argument boils down to this. Video games need an easy mode. No, they don't. Even if it can be kinda nice. That's because need is a very strong word. I can save you some time. What you really want to say is that a game can be more widely appealing and potentially sell more copies if it offers a mode that tones down the difficulty. And to that I say, I think you might be right. However, I think if you assume the goal of every game is to sell the most copies and/or make the most amount of money, that's fine as long as you don't believe in video games as an art form. If you do, well, maybe you should reconsider the purpose of art. If you don't, well, companies can attempt to design a product to appeal to a specific market rather than a general one. Sometimes filling a specific niche is better for gaining a dedicated audience of customers who keep coming back as opposed to trying to have broad appeal. Even purely as a product, not every game is designed to appeal to every person. That's my typical argument for defending the existence of difficult games, and the same argument I make for defending the existence of easy ones. As much as this video is going to be about hard games, there's also a few voices that get upset when the latest Pokemon game isn't as hard as they remember when they played it as a kid who didn't know what they were doing. It wouldn't take that much to implement a mode that ups the levels of all the Pokemon or gives them more moves or whatever, but I just don't think that's what Pokemon is in Game Freak's mind. There is such a thing as easy games. In fact, I think it's easier to accept a game being easy. People can say that it isn't for them and move on, emphasis on the can. If a game is too hard, well, now they wasted their money on something impossible and they can't make any progress and deserve a refund. This is usually framed as an accessibility issue, and I can absolutely see it that way. But I find accessibility is at its best when it's tailored towards a specific problem. Colorblindness is probably the most common issue with video games, especially in ones where the player needs to quickly identify what's part of the background and what's a threat. Colorblind mode or a high contrast mode are decent solutions that even people who are not colorblind can prefer. An easier difficulty or an outright invincibility mode might technically fix any issues with colorblindness by making it so the player can't lose, but I think many would find it unsatisfying. The ability to rebind buttons is standard practice at this point, which is a good accessibility feature for anyone who struggles with the default layout. I can kinda relate. If I couldn't rebind everything in Final Fantasy XIV, it would be a lot more painful to do long prog sessions. I'd still do it though. While I could go down a list of specifics and how much cooler I think they are, it's impossible to make a specific feature for every single disability in human history. At the very least, game designers should be aware that certain choices will deliberately exclude certain players. And while something like God Mode might be a bit simplistic, it is a catch-all guarantee that any player can finish the game. However, I rarely see the same attitude taken towards something like Fly Wrench or God Hand. The easy mode on that game is still harder than most other video games. There are so many difficult games that already exist or have yet to come out that do not get the same kind of attention. I already know the answer to this one too. It's because they are not high-profile releases with tons of hype and critical acclaim that convince people to buy them who otherwise might not. Allow me to tie this back into why I hate the idea of objectively good game design. Just because some titles are held up as masterpieces does not mean they will appeal to everyone and that everyone has to play them. Sometimes I wonder if it's a simple marketing issue. Should difficult games have a label that say, easy mode not included, and your mother would hate playing this game? I guess Prepare to Die edition wasn't cringy enough. I know this is anecdotal, but I got dragged into an argument with someone who tried Elden Ring and absolutely hated it. Then, they downloaded a mod to become completely invincible and walked around the world to enjoy the scenery. They then wondered why that wasn't an option in the game itself. And my answer was, it's fine if you modified a game to have fun with it, but that's just not what the game is. Changing the difficulty like that, even as an option, completely changes the game. My all-time example of this is Celeste. The final screen of that game's final post-game challenge is maybe not the hardest thing, but it's long, and it's Celeste, so you can't make a single mistake. After dying multiple times, Madeline's alter ego manifests and says something to the effect of, yeah, this challenge is pretty hard, but you can beat it. You've done everything else up until this point. And it was such a surreal moment because I haven't played too many hard games that decide to give some positive encouragement for once. I was like, yeah, you're right. I did beat the whole game up until this point. I can win. When it all finally came together and my heart was racing so fast that my hands practically went numb on the last couple of jumps, easily became one of my favorite gaming memories. Then my buddy said he thought it was too bullshit, so he turned on invincibility to bypass it. Talk about being completely deflated that we couldn't connect over that moment at all. This isn't a knock against Celeste for having accessibility options. In my old review of the game that you shouldn't watch, I think it's actually a good thing. But the fact that I walked away feeling hyped up about the ending and my buddy walked away feeling disappointed made me wonder if having the option allowed people to ruin the game for themselves. That or he probably would have just rage quit without it. Though it is weird when these options seemingly defeat the entire purpose of the game. When I first popped in Devil May Cry 5, I remember that it said the lowest difficulty was intended for people who are not familiar with action games. I figured it was a long time since I got my ass beat in Devil May Cry 3, so I turned it down and my god, it is so fucking boring on the lowest difficulty. Enemies have so little health that there's no opportunity to land a single smokin' sexy style combo. I could say the lower difficulties should have just lowered the enemy's damage and not their health, but why even include a mode that seems to remove the point of the game? Going back to Elden Ring, those vistas would not affect me as much if I didn't have to slug through some absolute horseshit to get to them. I can keep going. In Lobotomy Corporation, and there's some light spoilers for Library of Ruina here, Angela's meltdown about the cycles of endless suffering wouldn't hit me as hard if I didn't suffer through this stupid fuck-ass game, because having the option to tap out would make these into different games. Not an objectively better or worse one, but a different one. Challenges can be completely arbitrary and still be valid, but let's not get too saucy today. Difficulty in a game like Library of Ruina serves several purposes, the biggest one being forcing players to engage with the deck building and figure out what synergies exist, or learn the specific gimmicks of a boss and tailor their deck for that encounter. If there existed a way to reduce the difficulty, it would allow players to bypass those mechanics, which Project Moon clearly doesn't want people to do. So if someone is struggling in Library of Ruina, what do people recommend? Looking up builds online. Or if you get tired of grinding out the cards you want using a mod to bypass it, Forcing players to cooperate or create their own resources online to better understand the gimmicks is another reason for not allowing the difficulty to be modified in a menu. Back in the day, they would sell magazines to help people instead. Now, if we follow this chain of thought, we find ourselves here, at this pin I saved from earlier. Looking up builds online and using guides. Is this, secretly, easy mode? Behold, the easy mode lens to view every conceivable way to engage with video games. As I like to say, you could look at it this way, but why? When difficulty is the only lens by which people examine video games, it's fucking annoying. I remember when I watched someone explain that Dark Souls does have a difficulty modifier. You see, if you upgrade a bonfire, that's 10 flasks, which makes the journey safer. Thus, the difficulty mode is how many flasks you give yourself. Yeah, you're right, and I could take 2 ounces of water on a hike in the desert. It's not wrong, but it's weird. Having more heals does make it easier, but does the game say it's expected that the player only plays with 5 flasks? If not, I guess that's hard mode? So they're expected to upgrade all the bonfires? When they get the ability to upgrade to 15, is that super easy mode being unlocked like they died 10 times in Devil May Cry 3? Is the final stretch with the Lord Vessel super duper easy mode? Is attempting to prepare oneself for a challenging gameplay segment bypassing the gameplay mechanics? I know it's annoying to talk about all the different systems in Dark Souls specifically, but getting the plunging attack on the Tauros demon because you see a ledge nearby is a reward for paying attention, not a handicap for people who can't bait it off the ledge. I don't even want to get into magic where the player has to track down specific NPCs to get spells and gets taxed a bunch of extra souls just to bypass the melee combat, which isn't super good in every encounter. Why would anyone want to look at video games this way? Thinking of every single micro decision as actually tweaking a metaphorical difficulty slider? Plus, as games become increasingly complex, it's harder and harder to sort every single thing into easy mode and hard mode. I usually try to view these things as gameplay knowledge rewards the player just as much as their mechanical execution. Back to Lobocorp, knowing how all the abnormalities work is by far the biggest advantage the player has at their disposal. By learning how everything works, did the player secretly activate easy mode? That's like saying studying for an exam is easy mode. It is technically true, but it sounds stupid. Let's not talk about looking everything up in Lobocorp versus learning it by trial and error, because that's a whole other can of worms. Stepping back into gameplay systems, in difficult RPGs, characters tend to get stronger over time as they gain levels. A strategy when met with a wall in those types of games can be grind up some enemies to beat the next challenge. In fact, it's so ingrained in some people that it's their first instinct when they get stuck. Aha! See what you did there? You secretly unlocked easy mode by over-leveling yourself. All it did was take multiple hours doing the same repetitive task to make a number go up. Power leveling is more of a trade-off. A player can bash their heads into a segment trying to see if they can make it work, or they can spend that time powering up. I have a hard time calling anything that takes a bunch of time easy. Tedium is one of the hardest things to deal with on the planet. While some people think power leveling is a way to invalidate a game, the reason most people don't care is because it ties into another paradigm of game design: getting stronger over time. In something like Zelda, exploring more of the map and doing side quests can award the player with more heart containers. In Hollow Knight, there's extra charms to find. In Devil May Cry, you can unlock more moves with more red orb investment. In Mario, he can eat a mushroom to take an extra hit. I think you get the idea. Technically, doing any of these things will make the game easier, but many players are not motivated by that. They are motivated by wanting to feel more powerful. Even if those are technically the same thing, game design is a lot of smoke and mirrors, but as long as people are motivated by something that makes them happy, then it's not really a big deal. Ooh, there's a good small RPG Maker game gimmick. Make an RPG where every level the player earns doesn't power them up, it powers the enemies down. Context like this matters as it completely changes how people will view a game as they play it. It's why it's a pet peeve of mine when people try to insult each other for making the game too easy on themselves. They might not be motivated by that in the first place, and even if they are, who the fuck cares? If you beat hard games just to feel superior to other people, you need a better hobby. Have you considered being a YouTuber? Now I like hard games. I even play hard video games to relax and unwind. That might sound insane, and I am misshapen, but the ones I use for this are also pretty simple games. I can be so focused on one specific task that the rest of the world slowly drowns out and I don't have to think about things going on in my personal life. I find it very meditative. Or perhaps distracting. Most of my time in traditional fighting games is just attempting to do a combo on a training dummy until I finally get it right. Beyond the mindless distraction use case, challenging games are also very addictive to me. Finally overcoming some bullshit and getting that rush is something that I keep chasing. It starts to become a problem though as I get too good because I have to play harder and harder games to get the same high, and eventually the games that are catered to this specific audience are so far removed from what beginners are expecting it looks like a bunch of people touching an electric fly swatter and getting off on it. Players do have to accept that developers can't push the boundaries forever, or else nobody's going to be able to get into the hobby anymore. My only toxic opinion about difficulty is that I do think most people are capable of beating difficult games. I just think a lot of people don't want to. And that's fine. Not everybody wants to put in the time and effort. They might not even have those things to spare in the first place. There are two big ideas when it comes to difficulty, which is still a gross oversimplification, but stick with me. Either the game is intended to be experienced by everyone who can tweak it to their enjoyment, or games have one fixed difficulty that everybody has to go through so they all get a similar experience knowing that every player has been through the exact same trials as they have. And as far as which one is superior, it just depends on what kind of game you want to make. To throw everyone for a loop after saying all of this, I don't think it's a bad thing to voice an opinion that a game is too hard. For one, it can help other people gauge if they would even enjoy it in the first place, and it can even help developers too. Perhaps they didn't intend for parts of their game to be as annoying as large chunks of their player base are experiencing. There's always a gap between the game designers want to make and what they actually make. Perhaps they missed their mark. Or perhaps easy mode tools can serve as inspiration to make a different game. As much as I keep saying it is what the game is, that doesn't mean that concept can't change over time. Of course, if you're responding to complaints, you'd have to have official feedback channels that sample what the general player base is feeling to get a real big picture rather than just following what some people are posting on social media, which could represent a small vocal minority, but ultimately, it's fine. This does have the consequence of players like me wanting to rush to beat games before they're made easier because I don't want someone else to decide if it's too annoying for me. But I can always just backdate my games if I really care that much. So no, I don't have an issue with people voicing their complaints or wanting something that appeals to them. I will get annoyed though, if your first instinct when encountering something annoying in a video game is to demand to get it changed. There's so many other things to try before reaching that point. A point that I also have. And when I reach my breaking point, I take a break. Once I've gotten too mad at something, it only makes me play worse. Then it becomes impossible to make any meaningful progress. And there are games out there that are still too much for me. I can live with that. Just like how I can live with enjoying games that aren't so crushingly difficult because I enjoy more than one type of video game. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what am I playing the game for? Do you play video games just to get to the credits, or do you play them to enjoy getting to that point? Many of the old arcade games I mentioned don't even have a definitive endpoint. Players would just play until they were satisfied or ran out of money. Just because a player doesn't finish the main campaign doesn't mean that they can't be a fan. How many people actually completed the story of Skyrim? It sounds bold to say an incomplete playthrough is still a valid playthrough, But look at how few people have story completion achievements for any game on Steam. There's a concept of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is a reward for doing something. Beat the game, get a cookie. You might not care for the game, but you really want that cookie. Versus intrinsic, where you just find the game fun and don't really care about what kind of stale cookie you get at the end. All games are going to use some amount of both. Just be careful if all you want is the cookie, because it doesn't sound like you enjoy the game. It sounds like you just want the reward. For anyone out there who wants to start playing more demanding games, hard games are an acquired taste. I see some people stay away by making the assumption that they are always frustrating and stupid and they'll never like them. They are designed to be enjoyed by somebody. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Someone thinks they're not good at hard games, therefore they don't put any effort into getting better at them, and they continue to struggle. I didn't start by enjoying hard games right away. At first I got too pissed off and put it down until I tried it again and it finally clicked. A moment that a lot of people share. My advice I want to give to people, provided that they have the extra income to invest into their hobbies, is to take a step outside of their comfort zone and try some different games. Whether that's trying something difficult and learning how to beat it, or playing something easy and learning to enjoy the simpler things. This is a fun hobby, and there's always more out there to discover. After all that, there's a chance you still don't like the game you took a chance on. And that's okay. Go play something that you like instead. Well, it's either that, or make a 90-minute YouTube video telling everyone why you think it sucks. Now let's get out there and what the fuck was that? A big thank you, as always, to my patrons and to the people who send me coffee money on a website called Ko-Fi for making this content possible. If I see a YouTube comment asking for a Trails in the Sky 3rd video, I will politely remind them that it is a Patreon goal. Don't worry, I will still be making other, shorter videos in the meantime.